So welcome to another Texas adventure, and this one actually is Texas history. This is a big part of Texas history. Today we're at Presidio La Bahia in historic Goliad, Texas. And if you are interested at all in Texas history and the Texas Revolution and the War for Independence, this has to be a stop. There is so much Texas history here, you can feel it as you walk through the Presidio. And we're going to take you through and show you a little bit of this fort. Hopefully you can come down to Goliad and check it out, because this is an amazing place to be for anyone interested in Texas history. So come on along and join me. The oldest fort standing west of the Mississippi River still stands today at Goliad, Texas. Presidio La Bahia was originally founded in 1721 as Nuestra Señora de Loreto Presidio near present-day Port Lavaca. Its purpose was to protect Mission Espiritu Santo and the other property interests of Spain against the Native Americans, the French, and later the English and Americans. Both the mission and the Presidio were moved to the Guadalupe River just 5 short years later in 1726, and moved again in 1749 to their current locations on the San Antonio River. Even though Presidio La Bahia is an inland fort, it became responsible for the defense of all of Spain's coastal and eastern provinces in what would become Texas after the other Presidios were abandoned. Presidio La Bahia and its 2 missions are the only surviving example of a Spanish colonial mission Presidio complex in Texas. Here's a brief history. La Bahia is one of the only communities west of the Mississippi River to have participated in the American Revolution. From 1779 to 1782, Spanish soldiers from this fort escorted large herds of cattle from Presidio La Bahia to Spanish Colonel Bernardo de Galvez and his men as they fought against British forces. Galvez was the governor of Louisiana under Spanish rule, and he had a history of supporting American patriots during the Revolutionary War. Galveston Bay is named for him. From 1812 to 1813, the longest siege in Texas military history took place here. During the Gutierrez-McGee occupation, 300 men claimed Presidio La Bahia under the green flag of the First Republic of Texas. The Spanish retook the Presidio a short time later following their victory at the Battle of Medina. In 1821, Mexico gained its independence from Spain, and Presidio La Bahia began flying the flag of Mexico. There was a brief exception to this during that same year when the James Long expedition occupied the fort for 3 days and flew the red and white flag of the Second Republic of Texas over La Bahia. In 1829, this growing community outside the walls of Presidio La Bahia changed its name to Goliad. That same year, Ignacio Zaragoza was born just outside the fort walls. His father was a soldier at the Presidio, and Ignacio Zaragoza would go on to make history of his own. The Zaragoza family is a good example of life at the Presidio. The Presidio community was basically a closed community. Single men lived in the barracks within the fort. Married men lived with their families in small huts just outside the walls. The community was completely self-reliant, herding cattle and raising crops, primarily corn. Children of soldiers remained in the community throughout their lives. Boys became soldiers. Girls married soldiers and became teachers and medical caregivers within the fort. As generations passed, more outside folks chose to live near the Presidio walls for protection. The community of La Bahia, later known as Goliad beginning in 1829, grew, and Presidio families began to interact more with the outsiders who had become locals. They began to marry into non-military families and trade food and resources. The growth of the community of Goliad caused problems for the Presidio, as the roofs of the houses now blocked the garrison's field of fire. So ironically, though the population was growing due to the want of protection, that very growth made protection much more difficult. Couple this development with Mexico's distraction of building a new nation, and Presidio La Bahia found itself unprepared to defend itself as the Texas Revolution began. The Presidio was captured by the Texians on October 9, 1835. On December 20th, 1835, the bloody arm flag, which some people call the Goliad flag, was raised above Presidio La Bahia upon the signing of the first Declaration of the Independence of Texas. That declaration was signed by 92 citizens and soldiers on the altar of Our Lady of Loreto Chapel inside the Presidio. In February 1836, Colonel James Walker Fannin assumed command of the Texian army here at Goliad. Just a few days later, the siege of the Alamo began in what is now San Antonio. Following the fall of the Alamo, Colonel Fannin received orders from General Sam Houston to retreat from Goliad to Victoria. Several days later, and loaded with equipment and heavy artillery, Fannin and his men began a slow evacuation of Presidio La Bahia. They were met at Loreto Creek by Mexican forces led by General José de Urrea. After 2 days of battle, running low on water and unable to aptly treat their wounded, which included Fannin himself, Colonel James Fannin and his leaders signed documents of surrender. Historical accounts indicate that the Texians believed that they were to be held as prisoners of war and eventually released to return to the United States. But actually, the documents signed by Fannin and his leaders made their troops, quote, subject to the disposition of the supreme government, unquote. In other words, it was agreed that General Santa Anna would determine their fate. Over the course of the next several days, the Texians were returned to Presidio La Bahia. During this time, General Urrea wrote to Santa Anna recommending clemency for the prisoners. His request was denied. On March 27, 1836, here at Presidio La Bahia, Colonel Fannin and his approximately 400 men were shot and killed in what would become known as the Goliad Massacre. A story from the day tells that upon being brought outside of the chapel to be executed, Colonel Fannin gave his gold watch to the officer in charge of the firing squad in return for a proper burial. Fannin was then blindfolded, shot, rolled into a ditch, and burned with the bodies of his men. A month later, on April 21, 1836, General Sam Houston's army defeated General Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto, marking the true beginning of Texas independence from Mexico. Some historians believe that the lack of mercy shown here at Presidio La Bahia served as extra motivation for the Texians at San Jacinto. Definitely worth mentioning as part of the story of La Bahia is the story of Señora Francita Alaves, who is known as the Angel of Goliad. Señora Alaves' husband was a captain in the Mexican army while Fannin and his men were being held at Presidio La Bahia. When she learned that orders had been given to execute the Texians, she hid as many of them as she could and pled for clemency of others. She is credited with saving the lives of 25 men here at Presidio La Bahia. So now we're at the Fannin Memorial, which sits just outside of the walls of Presidio La Bahia. And the marker here tells the story. This is the grave of Colonel J.W. Fannin and his men. After the Battle of Loreto, March 19th to 20th, 1836, where a Texas army under Colonel James Walker Fannin met defeat by Mexicans in superior numbers, the Texas soldiers were held in Presidio La Bahia, supposedly as war prisoners. However, by order of Mexican General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, approximately 400 of Fannin's men were marched out and massacred on Palm Sunday, March 27, 1836. The wounded were shot one by one in the fort compound. Colonel Fannin was the last to die. Because of their profession, Doctors J.H. Bernard, J.E. Field, and Jack Shackelford were spared. About 25 men were saved by a Mexican woman, the Angel of Goliad. Approximately 30 escaped by feigning death or by swimming the San Antonio River. The Texans' corpses were stripped and partly burned, but left unburied. This atrocity, 3 weeks after the fall of the Alamo, gave Texans part of the battle cry, "Remember the Alamo, remember La Bahia," under which decisive victory was won at San Jacinto on April 21st, 1836. General Thomas J. Rusk and the Texan Army afterwards marched here and gathered the bones of Fannon's men from the terrain. From Presidio La Bahia, the remains were carried in procession to the grave and there given a military funeral and burial on June 3rd, 1836. So this is a statue that's erected to Senora Francisca Alaves, the Angel of Goliad. It sits between the Fannin Memorial and Presidio La Bahia. So this is just a little piece. What we've shown you is just a little piece of what there is to see here. I hope it's encouraged you to take your own trip down here to Goliad and relive some of this fantastic history. And remember, we also have a video on Goliad State Park and Historic Site, which is just half a mile just up the road, very close together. Great place to stay in your RV or your tent so that you can explore this area. So until next time, thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out our other video on Goliad. And this is Stacie from RVTexasyall.com. Safe travels and happy camping. Bye. Going into, there's a step down. Gets lower here.